New from MyProtein, the protein shake that changes the game. Way Forward is better for the planet and fuels maximum performance. It's time for change. It's time for the Way Forward.
This is part 2, or a continuation of the last video I posted for Generation Iron, where I discuss supplements, various sports supplements that are recognized by science as having enough evidence behind them to be considered actually useful supplements. And I should also point out, before I get into the rest of the supplements that science has deemed useful and effective, I also want to point out there's a lot of other supplements that I personally think are also very useful and effective, but for some reason they haven't gotten the imprimatur of a lot of scientists as being useful. But I know from my own personal use and that of many others that some of these other supplements can be useful, but I'm not going to get into it in this video because it would make the video too long. So what I'm going to talk about is basically supplements, sports supplements, that have a good evidence behind them, enough where scientists will say that they're effective. And I think I left off last time with beta-alanine. So today I'm going to we'll start off with sodium bicarbonate. Of course, sodium bicarbonate is a natural substance. It's produced in the body, mainly in the kidneys. It's a blood buffer. If you have, for example, let's say you're having a heart attack, you go to the emergency room, you could slip into something called acidosis, where you get an accumulation of acidity in the blood, which is very dangerous. And in the hospital, they will give you an IV bolus of sodium bicarbonate, which will immediately alkalize the blood. Well, it also is used in sports because, again, for the same reason, it's a buffer. It buffers acid. Now sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda, it cannot enter the muscle. What it does, when you take sodium bicarbonate, it gets into the blood, and acid is actually released from the muscle, and some of it gets into the blood. And what happens is the sodium bicarbonate neutralizes it, but in doing so, somehow it has this effect where it has a spillover effect where it neutralizes some of the acid that's being produced in the muscle, even though the bicarb itself doesn't get in the muscle. So sodium bicarb has been proven effective. I used to give sodium bicarb or baking soda to athletes I worked with in the 80s. I worked with a lot of boxers. I found if I gave them certain doses, I had to experiment with doses of sodium bicarbonate. I'm going to call it sodium bicarb because a lot of people have a different tolerance to it. It's actually very high in sodium. 1 teaspoon of sodium bicarbonate contains 1,259 milligrams of sodium, and some people, it's a little bit too much sodium for some people. They get gastrointestinal problems like nausea, so you have to adjust the dosage. And if you're going to try using sodium bicarbonate, it's best to take it about maybe 2 hours before you work out, or before, let's say, a sports event that involves a high acid or fatigue effect, high intensity sports, sprinting, that kind of stuff. And of course, like I said, I gave it to boxers, and the effect it had on the boxers is that after a couple of rounds of throwing punches, your arms get very tired. It's hard to keep your arms up to defend your head and that kind of stuff. Boxers tend to drop their arms. When that happens, they're open to getting punched in the face and knocked out. And that's because of the acid buildup in the arms from throwing so many punches. And when you give them sodium bicarb, it actually reduces the acid accumulation, allows them to keep their hands up so they don't get that arm fatigue, and they could fight for the full 12 rounds or whatever it does. I found it to be pretty effective. Again, some boxers couldn't handle it, so I didn't give it to all the fighters. Other fighters I gave another supplement, let's say acid buffer called Phosphate. I gave, if they couldn't handle sodium bicarbonate, I gave them Phosphate. That was taken 4 days before at a dose of 6 grams a day. It kind of built up in the muscle, had a buffer effect. But if you're going to try sodium bicarbonate, the dose is 0.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. You want to take it Again, 60 to 150 minutes before activity. If you want to avoid these, if you tend to get that nauseous or gastrointestinal side effect, you can have a small carbohydrate meal with it, and it'll usually prevent the nausea effect. It's for the full benefits, you want to probably start taking it 2 to 4 days before any type of sports event if you're going to use it for sports. And again, 1 teaspoon of sodium bicarbonate, that's 4.6 grams of bicarbonate. So then now as an alternative to sodium bicarbonate, again, some people just can't handle the sodium bicarb. So there's another buffer that has been deemed effective by science, and that's called sodium citrate. Again, it contains sodium, but this time instead of having bicarb, it has citrate. Citrate itself is a direct buffer. As a matter of fact, there's a supplement called potassium citrate that actually has been shown to prevent kidney stones because it prevents the precipitation of certain minerals. But sodium citrate, not as effective as sodium bicarb, but it is a fairly effective buffer to prevent the accumulation of acidity and which along with the muscular fatigue. I mentioned phosphates, still another possible buffer. Then another supplement, and this is kind of an interesting thing here. I'm sure a lot of the bodybuilders out there and people involved in fitness have heard of this one. This is L-carnitine. The reputation of L-carnitine is as a fat burner, and this is what it's based on. L-carnitine is made in the body from amino acids. One of them's lysine. I don't remember the others, but I know that vitamin C is involved in the enzymatic conversion of amino acids into L-carnitine. And so L-carnitine is made in the body. Why? Because it's absolutely essential to health. L-carnitine is needed to transport small chain fatty acids into the mitochondria, the portion of the cell where fat is oxidized. Without L-carnitine, you can't get fat into the mitochondria. Fat can't be properly oxidized. So because of this fact that L-carnitine is needed for fat oxidation in the cell, it earned a reputation as a so-called fat burner. Here's the problem. The problem is when you take supplemental L-carnitine, and the average dose is usually 2 to 4 grams, you get an increased level of carnitine in the blood. Unfortunately, the L-carnitine doesn't get into the muscle, and you want it in the muscle because the muscle is where the fat burning occurs. Of course, this doesn't mean that L-carnitine is worthless. It just means that it doesn't get into the muscle. A couple of years ago, some scientists figured out a way to shuttle more L-carnitine, oral L-carnitine. They found a way to increase the entry into muscle. This involved taking it with carbohydrates, and they recommended as much as 95 grams of simple sugars. That's a lot of carbohydrates with each dose of carnitine. They found by doing that, you increase muscle carnitine by 15%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but for endurance athletes, it's important for them to get, to be able to utilize fat as a source of energy, because the muscle glycogen they have and the liver glycogen, in a long race, it tends to be exhausted. When that happens, it's called hitting the wall. Their muscles basically stop working. If they could tap into fat more readily, it'll give them more endurance. Caffeine also helps you tap into fat. But carnitine in the muscle will actually help to, directly use fat as a source of energy and also help to oxidize the fat. So what they found is that, you would think that taking that much carbohydrate would cause an increase in body fat, but because these endurance athletes burn so many calories through their exercise and practice, not only did they not get fat, most of them lost fat with supplemental carnitine. However, I have misgivings myself. I like the idea of taking 95 grams of simple sugars, because if you take several grams of carnitine a day, you could be taking in 500-600 grams of simple sugars. I don't think that's a good idea. And the mechanism involves the simple sugar stimulates insulin. And the insulin is what pushes the carnitine into the muscle, Just like insulin pushes amino acids into the muscle, it also pushes carnitine into the muscles. But again, too much insulin, if you stimulate it several times a day to a great extent, it will also, especially if you're eating a lot of calories, will stimulate body fat accretion. So I'm not really big on this carbohydrate aspect of carnitine. I should also point out that some studies have shown that, despite not getting into the muscle, some studies have shown that taking in about 2 to 4 grams of carnitine did seem to stimulate a little bit of fat loss in some people. Not all studies show. Most of the studies showed no fat loss, but a couple of them did. I can't explain the difference. I don't know why that occurred. But there is a form of L-carnitine called L-carnitine tartrate, where they've shown if you take it before you work out, about 4 grams, it will actually stimulate the development of more androgen receptors in muscle. Androgen receptors are what testosterone locks onto or interacts with, and also anabolic steroids interact with androgen receptors. The more androgen receptors you have, the greater anabolic effect you'll get from your natural testosterone or any testosterone-like drugs like steroids that you take. So that's an interesting feature of some forms of L-carnitine. There's another form of L-carnitine. I believe it's called L-carnitine propionate, if I remember correctly. And they've shown that taking large doses of this stuff, I think it's something like up to maybe 18 grams a day, if I remember correctly, is actually a very potent stimulus for nitric oxide production. In fact, L-carnitine propionate stimulates nitric oxide synthesis better than any of the so-called nitric oxide boosting supplements. But you have to take large amounts of it. Now, the problem with taking large amounts of L-carnitine is some people would get, again, gastrointestinal effects. If you go past like 10 grams, it can give you like stomach upset and also, explosive diarrhea, which is self-explanatory. I'm not going to explain what that means other than keep your diapers handy. The last one, let me see here. The last one, I should also mention that I forgot to mention with the sodium phosphate, one of the features of sodium phosphate as a buffer, I should have mentioned this earlier, is that it stimulates in red blood cells the production of a substance called 2,3-DPG, which actually increases the ability of hemoglobin, which carries oxygen in the blood. It increases the ability of hemoglobin to carry oxygen more efficiently, which would actually increase endurance and lessen muscle fatigue. That's one of the features of phosphate as an ergogenic aid. I forgot to mention that. The last one I'm going to discuss that's accepted by science as having being effective as a sports supplement is citrulline. And I've discussed citrulline in past videos. Citrulline is an amino acid not involved in muscle protein synthesis. It's found in natural foods, particularly watermelon. In fact, the word citrulline is taken from I don't know whether it's a Latin word, I don't remember, but it's basically taken from a word that means watermelon, because watermelon is the richest natural source. Now, the big feature about citrulline is that when you take, now arginine, the amino acid arginine is the immediate precursor for nitric oxide synthesis. When arginine encounters an enzyme in the endothelium, or the lining of blood vessels called nitric oxide synthetase, the arginine is immediately converted into nitric oxide. That's how nitric oxide is produced. The problem is arginine, a lot of when it's ingested orally, a lot of it doesn't get into the blood because it's broken down by an enzyme in the gut called arginase. I believe that you're lucky to absorb maybe 60% of an oral dose of arginine. The rest of it's degraded by arginase. The other ways to increase nitric oxide are to take foods rich in nitrate, such as certain leafy green vegetables, spinach, beetroot juice. If you take it about 2 hours before exercise, those foods contain nitrate, which will be converted in the body into nitrite. Nitrite, in turn, is converted by enzymes produced by oral bacteria into nitrate, nitrite. The nitrite goes into the gut and it's further converted into nitric oxide. It takes about 2 hours for that to happen. So if you want to go the route of natural food sources, you'd have to take these vegetables like leafy greens, beetroot juice about 2 hours before training. Will also increase nitric oxide. Citrulline is still another way. How does citrulline work? Now, I mentioned the arginine breaking down arginine, but when you take citrulline, the arginine does not act on citrulline. So what happens is the citrulline travels to the kidneys. The kidneys contain enzymes that convert citrulline back into arginine. Because, see, you have to understand, citrulline is produced from arginine. When arginine is metabolized, one of the byproducts is citrulline. But the kidneys reverse the effect. They take oral arginine that you ingested and they turn it back into citrulline. The citrulline, is then converted. What happens is that citrulline is then converted by the enzymes in the kidney back into arginine, and the arginine enters the blood without having to worry about arginase. And as soon as it hits that NO enzyme, which is fast, boom, you've got nitric oxide. And that's the benefit of citrulline. It's an alternative source for nitric oxide production. However, while it's generally accepted as an effective ergogenic aid by most sports scientists, the actual research on citrulline is mixed. Some studies show it increases anaerobic exercise, such as weight training. Others show that it has very little effect. So I think a lot of it has to do with the timing and the dosage. You have to take it about an hour before training. You give it a chance to be fully converted back into arginine in the kidneys. And you have to take the right dosage, which is a minimal dosage of 6 grams to 8 grams. You have to take 6 to 8 grams, with 8 grams being ideal, but if you want, start out with 6 grams to see how you handle it so you don't have any gastrointestinal effects. If you do it that way, I think you will get a pretty good nitric oxide production effect. What else can I say about citrulline? Anyway, well, it's the nitric oxide, besides giving you a better muscle pump and increasing oxygen delivery to muscle, very good for cardiovascular health. And a recent study I just saw the other day where they showed that drinking beetroot juice or taking citrulline, it lowered the blood pressure that occurs with heavy exercise. Like, for example, if you get under a leg press machine and you really push that heavy weight, that compression where you bring the weight back towards your chest, that makes your blood pressure soar through the roof. As a matter of fact, just a little quick anecdote. You guys, I don't know if you remember, there was a movie years ago called Crocodile Dundee. The actor in the movie was named Paul Hogan from Australia. Paul Hogan was a weight training enthusiast. One day he was doing leg presses and he went back, and what happened was he got a stroke while he was doing leg presses because, again, when you do exercise that compress your chest especially, or anything that limits blood flow, your blood pressure, because the blood vessels are compressed, your body kind of deals with it by raising the blood pressure to make sure you get a proper blood circulation. And if you're prone to having any type of cardiovascular disease, that can be dangerous. Now, the good news is that if you're healthy and have a good cardiovascular system with no problems, your blood pressure drops right away. It doesn't stay elevated. As a matter of fact, weight training, contrary to what people believe, weight training actually helps to lower blood pressure as a reflex. It raises your blood pressure while you're doing it, but again, the body accommodates by lowering the blood pressure during rest and after the workout. So if you work out with weights, you actually tend to have lower blood pressure rather than raised blood pressure. And again, quick anecdote. When I started working out when I was about 11, 12 years old, I also coincidentally started having asthma attacks at that time. I went to a doctor and I mentioned that I had just started lifting weights, and this doctor told me that if I lift weights, I'll be dead before I'm 20. This is because lifting weights dramatically raises the blood pressure. He told me, and it will give me a heart attack or stroke. Of course, he didn't know anything about the physiology of weight training. And that was when I was 12. I've been lifting ever since. It's been over 60 years. Thank God I haven't gotten a stroke or a heart attack yet. But this particular doctor died 2 years later. He was overweight and smoked cigarettes, and I'm not making fun of him, but he died of a heart attack 2 years after that conversation. So I'll leave that as it is. But anyway, that's about it for the sports supplements that are recognized by science. As I said at the beginning of the video, this certainly isn't an inclusive list. There are many other supplements that don't have as much evidence as the ones I mentioned. In other words, the reason these particular supplements that I mentioned in these videos, the reason why they're accepted by most scientists is because they have a pretty good body of evidence behind them. But there are other sports supplements that don't have as much evidence yet, but they're still effective. Judging by anecdotal reports and the fact that I've used some of these supplements, fish oil, there's a couple of others I could suggest. I don't think whey protein was on the list of recommended supplements, but whey protein could be a very useful supplement if you, for some reason, can't consume enough food protein. If you don't have time, you don't have ideally you want to get in protein about every 5 hours, and a lot of people don't have time to do that. It's far easier to make a whey protein drink, something like that. So I would say that whey protein is definitely a effective sports supplement. There are others I'll probably be discussing in future videos, but I'm going to stop now because I'm over the 20-minute mark. If you want further information about nutrition, exercise science, ergogenic aids, hormonal therapy, anti-aging research you can use today, supplement science, which supplements work, which ones don't. No holds barred there. I'm not associated with any supplement company. 9 out of 10 people that make videos on YouTube and the internet, 9 out of 10 of them are either selling supplements on their own or they're being paid off by supplement companies. They're basically shills. So, you can't really trust what they say because, as they say, as the cliche says, they have a dog in the fight. In other words, you buying the supplements, it makes them get richer. I do not gain anything from supplements. I'm not associated with any supplement company. I use a lot of supplements myself, but I'm not paid to do it. I don't get any free supplements. So in my Applied Metabolics, I'm going to tell you the truth. If a supplement stinks, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to BS you like some of these people do. I'm going to tell you the truth because I don't like being lied to, and I'm sure many of you don't either. I also cover women's health and fitness, ergogenic aids. I think I mentioned hormonal therapy, such as variances of testosterone therapy. There's a lot of information coming out about testosterone therapy I haven't seen really produced much on the web. I'll be talking about that. General health, I talk about how to prevent heart disease, cancer. It's all in Applied Metabolics, 30 to 50 pages every month. No ads, just evidence-based information that includes my 60 years of constant study and experience, which cannot be duplicated by anyone. So I also want to point out that I've been publishing Applied Metabolics, I think now for about 8 years, if I remember correctly, and I'm still charging the same rate. In contrast, a lot of other digital publications, I'm not saying they're not good. I don't want to, I'm going to tell you the truth. Some of these digital publications, I've seen most of them, are actually quite good. They're written by, some of these guys are college graduates, and some of them have PhDs. They're educated people, and they give you good information. But they're kind of specialized. Some of them are specialized in exercise, strength training. Others are more specialized in nutrition. But nobody covers the depth and the variety of topics that I do. And also, most of those other publications, and this is a key point, they charge average 3 times the monthly subscription cost that I charge, and they are not even a third. There's not even a third as much information in each issue. So based on that, I would say unabashedly that Applied Metabolics is probably the greatest bargain you can get on the entire internet. And again, I'm telling you the truth. If you know anyone who has subscribed, they will verify everything I just said. So subscribe today, www.appliedmetabolics.com. When you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Facebook page for Applied Metabolics. It's only for subscribers. Each day I post new information on nutrition, exercise science, and general medicine. I also have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics web page, again, exclusively for subscribers. Any subscribers want to send me short questions about anything they read in Applied Metabolics or anything that comes to mind, I'll answer the questions. It's kind of like a service, a bonus that I include as part of the subscription to Applied Metabolics. So again, subscribe today, www.applied metabolics. I guarantee, I promise you, you will learn something in every issue. And I don't cover all the same garbage that you see everywhere else. Most of the stuff I cover is what they call off-the-road topics that you won't find anywhere except in Applied Metabolics. So take care. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter and adopt a dog. Take care.